bypass the secretary and go straight to influential editors. In 1990, when the voucher controversy was first surfacing in Milwaukee, Barrett got a call from a, quote, prominent Milwaukee business executive who wanted to speak off the record. Years later, this is how Barrett explains the story. He said some well-connected powers that be had concluded that it was finally time to pump taxpayer dollars into the Catholic schools, because that was the only way to save them. The push would be framed as an effort to help impoverished black children get a better education. But saving the Catholic schools was the driving force. Now, Milwaukee's voucher program started in 1990 with 340 students at 7 schools. It was small, it was secular, it was considered an experiment. Today, the voucher program involves almost 25,000 students at 112 schools. 85% of them attend religious schools. In size, the voucher program in Milwaukee is almost equal to the state's second largest school district. But there's a catch. Even if every single student receives a publicly funded voucher, the school is still defined as private. Now, for more than 20 years, voucher schools have literally been a conservative's dream. No teacher unions, no government bureaucracy, no curricular restrictions, the ability to kick out students at will. In 2010, for the first time, voucher schools, because of public pressure, finally, after 20 years, they had to release their test scores publicly, school by school. The results? The voucher schools as a group performed about the same as the public schools in reading, noticeably worse in math. When special education students were taken into account, the voucher schools did significantly worse in both reading and math. Now, Milwaukee was merely a softening up, as it were, because in Wisconsin, Governor Walker has taken the logical next steps. He wants to expand vouchers across the state. He also wants a new appointed board dominated by Republicans who will set up privately run charities anywhere in Wisconsin. There are higher payments for vouchers under his program, but funding is flat for public schools. Even some Republicans are balking. So I'd like to finish with a story about a young man who graduated from the Milwaukee Public Schools a couple of years ago. Today, he's an activist for immigrant rights. And the story is a reminder that we need to find examples of hope, energy, and resilience. Because we're going to have a lot of setbacks, personal, political, collective. And people often say to me, oh my gosh, what's going on with the schools? It's awful, it's depressing. And I say, you know, whenever I feel bad about the public schools in Milwaukee, I go visit a school. Because if you take your nose out of a book or a newspaper, and if you go visit a school, it is so heartening to speak to real students, real teachers, in real time. So I'm going to tell the story about Dennis Rodriguez. He's this great person. I could have spoken to him for days. Dennis Rodriguez left Veracruz, Mexico in 2002. He was 11 years old and did not speak a word of English. More problematic, neither he, his mother, his father, nor his brother had legal papers. Rodriguez, with the confidence of youth, has decided he will not live in fear. He refuses to hide his undocumented status. Fear is a mind killer, he says. Rodriguez didn't always feel that way. When he was at South Division High School, he and many of his friends, they thought there was little reason to do well academically because an undocumented person had no real future. One day, however, Dennis walked past a book sale sponsored by the school librarian, and that book sale changed his life. Rodriguez was an avid reader, and his bilingual classes in middle and high school had allowed him to maintain his Spanish while also learning English. I'm kind of nerdy, Rodriguez admits, so I was excited when I saw the book sale. So I asked the librarian what would be good to read. She pointed to one book, Man's Search for Meaning, and explained that it was by a psychologist, Viktor Frankl, talking about his experiences during the Holocaust. I pick up Frankl's book, and underneath is another book with a bright orange cover and this guy with wild hair and crazy eyes. The librarian said it was a book by Nietzsche, She wasn't sure she should recommend it because she knew it would be hard to read. But that cover was so eye-catching, Dennis says. So the books were only a couple of dollars. He bought them. It took me forever to get through those books, especially Nietzsche, he says. But they made me realize that I don't have to settle for what is here and now. I can build my own life. I mean, here's Frankel, this man who lost so much and went through so much suffering. Those books changed my life. So as Dennis Rodriguez says, we can build a new future. And if there's one message I want you to take home tonight from me, and there will be many messages of hope from our other speakers here. But what I tell people, it's what I told my children their whole lives. Never, ever give up. Never lose your passion. Never lose your vision. So on that note, on to our other esteemed speakers. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Barbara took my speech, so it's going to be quick. First of all, can I ask everybody to stand up, please? Everybody who is from the city of Chicago, stay standing.
Does it count if it's Oak Park?
Everyone who went to Chicago public schools, stay standing. Thank you very much. Congratulations for wanting to give back. I appreciate it. For those that didn't go to Chicago public schools, welcome to a whole new world. Right? Barbara talked about race, class, the intersections. These are some of the things that we always have to think about, and we have to be honest with ourselves about it. Chicago is the most segregated city in America. I did not make that up. It was reported last year when the Chicago Teachers Union put out a piece called "The Schools Chicago's Children Deserve." And we didn't use the word hyper-segregated, we said apartheid. We used a word that's been in use for a very long time. And we were criticized for it because for some reason, when you talk about race in America, people become very uncomfortable. Because it asks us to also think about privilege, status, power, clout. Many of us do not have that. And what public schools provide is an opportunity to change the calculus of the power elites. You will hear them talk about status quo. And they will say, anyone who doesn't agree with me is a defender of the status quo. But the status quo in America is to rank and sort people. The easiest way to rank and sort? You tell me. Grades, race, what else? Tests. What kind of tests? Standardized tests. Standardized tests are norm referenced. What is the norm in America? We are at an an important crossroads in America, where we can either give public education away, and in a way we've almost already done it. As teachers, we are the people who will always try to follow directions. How many times have you heard that? Your entire lives. Follow directions. Follow instructions. And as teachers, we're pretty good at that. We kind of insist that other people do that too. But I can guarantee you that we have been following the directions. And we have listened to 50 solid years of teacher bashing. And it's gotten worse since 1983, when A Nation at Risk was published. We have heard the bad teacher narrative over and over and over again. But you all are saying, I still want to be a teacher. That's an accomplishment. That's an achievement. And you've decided to make a commitment to learning how to teach in an urban setting. I take my hats off to you because you're walking into this knowing what's facing you. In 1987, when I started teaching, which was the year of the last strike, I got into teaching because I had flunked out of medical school and I hadn't figured out what I was going to be when I grow up. Now, mind you, I was 35. My parents both taught in CPS. And I thought, all right, I've listened to them long enough, who always told me, get your teaching certificate just in case. And I didn't want to teach. I wanted to do something else. I tried all these different things. I said, okay, I'll teach until I figured it out. And the year 87, I subbed, and mostly in elementary school, even though I was totally unqualified. It's very interesting how they place you. CPS will put you somewhere where you have absolutely no business being. So there I was. I will tell you the worst 3 days of my life were in pre-K. Little children scare me to no end. I'm going to tell you what I figured out. Okay, they love music. So the reason I actually got this job subbing was because the women knew my mom, and she'd actually asked for me because she was going to be out of town, and the Christmas pageant was coming up, and she needed somebody who could play the piano. So here we go, because I'm scared of them, and they touch you all the time. So it's kind of like, oh, you know, like Monsters, Inc. They touch you, it's like, oh, they're going to make you sick or something. But so I rehearsed them, so we played the song, and they were like done. I'm like, wait a minute, we have to do it again. You know, they were like going to sing it once and they were done, and then I wanted to put some choreography to it. So what I realized is, as scared as I was of those little children, I was making relationships with them. So this one little girl, I will never forget her, her name was Tamika, and she comes up to me and she said, Miss Jennings, because that's what I was then. Miss Jennings, we will do whatever you ask us to do. And I thought, oh my God. Because you taught us this, and you're going to make sure we're good. And, you know, I was like crying. And I thought, education, maybe I belong here. So, finished that subbing, got my courses. I was going to school. I was tutoring algebra. I was doing a whole lot of stuff. And I finally get my own classroom. And I walk in and I say, I'm coming in here because I want to make a difference in children's lives. I didn't want to teach the honors kids. I didn't want to teach the AP kids. I actually had an AP class. But I thought, if I could teach someone to think, to use their minds well, then I've taught them a life skill, not just chemistry, but a life skill that's transferable. And it has motivated me throughout my entire career. Because we are preparing children for life. We're not preparing them for something abstract. We are preparing them to make good choices. And every child deserves more than a choice, which is nothing but a chance. Our children deserve a guarantee. So, when I first started teaching, I thought this is amazing, it's wonderful. Relationships were flourishing. But then I started seeing things change. And as schools got labeled failures by a tool that was designed to promote the status quo of white supremacy. Let's be very clear. I'm going to say that again because I want you all to hear me. Schools were labeled failing by a tool designed to promote the status quo of white supremacy. I said it out loud. I want you to hear it. And yet, we complied because as teachers, we followed directions and instructions. And they said, you all need master's degrees. That's what you need, because once you get master's degrees, that's going to finish everything. So people went back and got master's degrees. Not enough. You need to have endorsements and this and that and the other. So what do people do? They go back. We as teachers have followed every single directive they have ever given us, willingly. Why? Because we want to do right by our children. But what do they say about us? We don't care about the kids. I wake up every morning and go to school because I don't care about kids. That makes sense to you? No. Then resist the rhetoric. Do not allow yourself to be labeled that way. Because who is saying that? People like Bill Gates. The Walton family in Arkansas, they don't believe in public education. They don't send their children to public schools. They didn't go to public schools. Eli Broad, the other one, he has an unaccredited superintendent's academy, and they take their people and implant them in schools, and the ideology flourishes. And we continue to follow directions. I will say to you that following directions has led us to the point where we are harming children. I taught at King High School, college prep. It was a black school. And I remember when I gave my first exam, multiple choice, kids came to me and they said, you know, I don't test well. And I said, clearly, because you're very bright. Because if you had tested well, you would be at Whitney Young, or Jones, or Peyton, or if you felt like taking that trek to Northside College Prep. But I'm not going to treat you like a test score. Your grade in my class is based on everything you do. And what I explain to them is that I assess them in a variety of ways. So if that's not their strength, because I think taking multiple choice tests is a skill, as opposed to really telling me content. And I learned that my very first year of teaching when I had a kid that failed every single test I ever gave, never did any homework, couldn't understand what was going on in the lab, but he scored beautifully On the multiple choice test that came with the books, I knew there was something wrong then. When my sharpest kids, black girls, weren't doing so well. There was inherent bias in this test. So, I mean, I look at the test, you have to take them, okay, whatever, but they don't define you. But these people are now out of control. They are completely out of control. They have swung so far away from real teaching and learning to talking about standards and assessment, but nothing in between. I'm also nationally board certified. And I got that in 2002. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Oh my God, it was hard. It was hard. And I renewed it during the whole strike talk. While we were in negotiations, I renewed my national boards. It was much easier. That first one will kill you. But the second one, not so bad. What shocked me was the difference 10 years later. That when I started national boards, we talked a lot about reflection and thinking about what we were doing, reflecting on best practice, how we gauge student learning, how do we know, how do we show it. And by 2012, the conversation was assessment, assessment, assessment. They have taken over. Why? Because it is easy for people who are not trained to teach to use data to drive instruction because they don't have a clue what they're doing. So if they want to make teaching a temporary job, fairly unskilled, but with missionary fervor, that's what they will do. Now, I will tell you, you are about to embark on some of the most difficult but most rewarding work you can ever imagine. And as Barbara said, you cannot give up because they're counting on it. The status quo says that within 5 years, 50% of you will be gone. 50%. That is a waste of talent that I cannot begin to tell you about. But also, it is a loss to the community. In the next few days, we're going to hear the Chicago Public Schools are going to close an inordinate number of schools. And they're going to lie about why they're doing it. They aren't ever held accountable. This is the part that hurts so much. They talk about accountability, but it only goes in one direction. It goes to students, and it goes to teachers, and it goes to principals, the people on the very front lines. And accountability doesn't mean accountability. Understand this, it means punishment. So people will be punished for being poor. And we live in a society now that believes in public humiliation. Public humiliation. In New York, they released the VAM scores. Value-added metrics are junk science. They're going to ask you to give tests that have a larger margin of error than they have room for growth. But they're going to judge you by it. And if you don't teach a tested subject, they're going to judge you by it anyway. And we're supposed to say, okay, and follow directions. I will tell you, there is a resistance movement growing among students, parents, and teachers to the status quo, and to the lies and the craziness. Again, double speak. George Orwell, where are you? I heard Barbara Byrd Bennett say today that closing schools was going to stabilize communities. I want to talk about one school in Chicago. Anybody here go to Whitney Young? Anybody?
My kids do.
Your kids do. When Whitney Young was opened in the 70s, the Near West Side was a deep ghetto. But people sent their children to Whitney Young from all over the city. What does the community around Whitney Young look like now? You should know, you're not far from it. It's completely gentrified. Schools stabilize communities. When you take a school away from a community, you have abandoned that community. What is such a shame is that people are making deals behind closed doors. People with power and clout and access to get their schools off the list, whether it's politicians, anybody else. But who will speak for the children with no access, no clout? Who will speak for them? That's what we do every single day. As teachers, we speak for people who cannot speak for themselves. Which is why your voice is so powerful. Our voice is so powerful. Which is why this past fall, when the Chicago Teachers Union went out on strike, we didn't just not go to work. Every other strike has been we just don't go to work. We took to the streets. And who was with us? Parents, community, people standing on corners by their schools. Everybody driving by and large, was honking their horns. That has never happened in the history of a teacher strike anywhere in this country. And there's a reason for that. And that reason is because you cannot constantly tell the people who work with children every day that they are not worthy, that they are lying when they say they love children. You don't go into this occupation, this profession, to get rich. Anybody here, did anybody here sign up for it? You might have signed up for pensions. And that's been the trade-off. All right, I'm not going to get rich, but I have a little job security, I have a little pension. Okay. Well, what do they tell you? Tenure's bad. It gives you a job for life. You know, that is the biggest lie ever. And I want to dispel those myths for you. Tenure does not give you a job for life. It entitles you to due process, which means nobody can come in and Donald Trump you. That's what they want. You're fired. You're fired. So, I want to close by thanking you for taking this journey. And I almost envy, no I don't. I actually do. I envy your idealism, your opportunity to study, because I'm such a geek. Anytime I could go to school, I would do that all the time if I could. But I know that you are ready to make the way for somebody else. And I know what you're prepared to do is to provide a real life for real children, not numbers on a spreadsheet. And I want to thank you so much for making this choice a real choice. Thank you.
lot of teachers around the country. And it's an honor to be speaking on the same stage as her, and of course, Barbara is also a hero for me in many other ways. I'm about to turn red. Let's get on with it. Okay. For the last 30 years, I've spent most of my adult waking hours surrounded by 10-year-olds, because I taught 5th grade for that long. 2 years ago, in the midst of the Wisconsin uprising, I was elected president of the Milwaukee Teachers Union, and people didn't know whether or not to give congratulations or condolences. And I'll tell you, I'd rather be surrounded mostly by 10-year-olds. You know, it's not the adults here accepted. Some of the adults I have to deal with, it's like they act like 10-year-olds, but you know, 10-year-olds you can at least excuse because they're 10 years old. I'm still trying to find the excuse for some top-level administrators. But I'm here to talk not about what two previous speakers did, because that would be redundant. I'm going to talk a little more about what I consider social justice teaching, and some advice, some reflections, and that I think will round out our presentations nicely. So here's a couple of sort of thoughts, like 4 or 5 thoughts on social justice teaching, then I'll give some examples from my classroom and share some student stories, and we'll wrap it up for questions. I think first of all, to be a social justice teacher, I think you have to listen to people like Barbara and Karen and realize that race and class are really central to our existence. Not only to our workplace, but also to our own selves. I really encourage people to reflect on their own histories of race, gender, class, your ecological history, your activist history, and to be able to reflect on that, because it will really inform how we treat children. I mean, I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. I grew up in a white neighborhood. I attended an all-white schools. I went to an all-white church. I watched all-white TV shows back then. Heck, even the house I lived in was painted white. And I learned that one of the biggest privileges of being white in the United States is that one doesn't have to think of one's race, of being white. It's perceived by many whites as a universal norm. Now, my life changed at age 12 when my father moved our family to Africa for 2 years, where he worked with the Ministry of Agriculture in Egypt, in Cairo. Spending my formative teenage years in a country that was not white, not Christian, not wealthy, not English-speaking. Heck, they didn't even have Roman letters on the street signs back then. Really awakened me about the white cocoon that had circled me. So that's my first thing, is to be reflective as a teacher. Keep a journal. Think. Write letters. I guess emails and texts would work. But, you know, letters. Anyway. Okay. Second, I think obviously the main thing about being a social justice teacher is how you organize your classroom, and what curriculum you use, despite what they tell you to use. You want that to reflect social justice values. We need to foster classrooms that prefigure the kind of society we wish to create. We want to encourage anti-racist attitudes, an atmosphere of questioning, give space to kids for them to talk back to the media, to their textbooks, to established order, and hopefully not too often to us as teachers. You want to push kids to ask questions such as, whose voice is included and left out of children's literature, textbooks, or math problems? Most important, why are certain people's voices left out? What's the relationship between poverty and wealth? And we should encourage students to develop a sense of awe and appreciation for the natural world, and to understand that this planet, is more threatened today than any other time in human history. But they, our students, have the ability to do something about all those things. That's central to a social justice teacher. But we also, as Barbara and Karen have reminded us, have to go beyond the classroom door. We can't just shut it and do great things and think everything's going to be okay. We have to, I tell my union members that if there's a teacher down the hall or a school down the street that you would want your own child to attend, then we have a responsibility to deal with it. In other words, we need to create entire schools and school districts that embrace social justice, where schools are centers of renaissance and resistance. Thirdly, we have to link up and connect with parent and community, both on educational and community issues. This was certainly one of the key lessons of the Chicago strike that I think teacher unions hopefully will pick up and learn from. But it's more than just having the community come and support us. It's us supporting the community in their struggles that don't directly have something to do with education. And it also has to do with you as a teacher, me as a teacher, taking the time to try to get to know the families, the parents, the caregivers of our students. And finally, I think a social justice teacher has to have an international perspective and understand that on this planet, the 1% and their lieutenants are trying to defund and privatize the public sector in every country of the world, particularly public schools, and they're attempting to destroy public sector unions to do it. We need to be part of an international movement that supports what's called the commons, the public sector. We need to reclaim the word democracy and to promote democracy in all spheres of society, not just political, but social and economic. So sometimes when I talk about these things to teachers or teachers-to-be, they say, great, here's the speakers telling us to do more at a time when expectations for classroom teachers are already astronomically high. And I know, as I said, before I was released full-time teaching, I was in the 5th grade. And during my decades of organizing for justice, I was also teaching for justice in my 5th grade. And like most 5th grade teachers in Milwaukee, I had to teach reading, writing, spelling, language, speaking, history, geography, current events, science, human growth and development, second-step violence reduction, art, physical education, music, and little things, like how to come in from recess, hang up your coat, and get a drink of water without having a fit because your ex-best friend got to the drinking fountain first. But that's why it's so important to be here. It's hard work, but you're together as a group. You're part of a teacher education program that values very important things, values reflection, values social justice. And people often ask me, Bob, how have you sustained yourself all these years? And I won't let Barbara answer that. Or how have you maintained your sanity? She might even question that. But the answer is actually simple. I didn't do it alone. I'm an organizer. No social movement has ever been conducted by just individuals. We need to be part of organizations, school communities, coalitions, study circles, PTAs, rank and file caucuses, and our unions, and making sure that our unions are organizations that stand up not just for bread and butter issues, but professional issues and social justice issues in the community, like the CTU does, and what we're trying to emulate in Milwaukee. Personally, what it's meant for me is that my 6th year of teaching, back a long time ago, well, 1986 it was, I helped start rethinking schools with an Apple IIe computer and a can of rubber cement on my kitchen table. It's been around 26 years, and it's been a key reason why I've stayed sharp as a teacher and kept teaching. It was a community of interest. But that wasn't enough for me in my 7th year, the following year, teaching. I was so dissatisfied with the traditional school that I was in. I organized teachers and parents and community members to take over a soon-to-be raised, soon-to-be-abandoned school building in the working-class, multiracial neighborhood in which I live. And we created La Scuola Frappy, a two-way bilingual, anti-racist, site-based management, neighborhood specialty school, we called it. The superintendent opposed our proposal, but we organized. We did not follow instructions, as Karen would say, and we prevailed. It was pretty shocking, having been involved in social justice movements. Pretty used to losing a lot of struggles. All of a sudden, shit, now we have a school we have to take.
We're not in 5th grade. It's okay.
And we've been struggling ever since. But it's a good school, and it has provided a community of teachers and parents who are supportive of social justice teaching. Now, I'm not suggesting that in order to be a new social justice teacher, you have to start a publication, although you should subscribe to the schools. Or that you seek out your colleagues and start a brand new school, or an independent organization. But there are things to get involved with. Certainly, the teachers union. They have a lot of great things going on. Groups like Teachers for Social Justice here in Chicago, or a study circle with the people you work with. studying, reading any kind of books. Teaching is a difficult job, and teaching in socially just ways in a period of political reaction, and by the way, we're in a period of political reaction, even with the president we have, who's great and glad he's elected, but you might notice other people around this society sort of pushing to the right, so we must do it together. So, as a 5th grade teacher, I've often thought of myself as a conductor of a relatively undisciplined orchestra. My curriculum is rich with literature circles, writing projects, dramas, role plays. For example, every year my students put Christopher Columbus on trial for crimes against humanity. And as the book Briefing Columbus explains, my students, they work, one group is Columbus and his lawyers, and I have to really convince my best students to be his lawyers because Columbus needs a lot. The crew, King Ferdinand, Queen Isabella, and the Taínos. And it's a dynamic. I invite parents in to watch it. It's a highlight of the fall. I encourage students to view the past and present through multiple perspectives. It's not just two sides of things, there's multiple perspectives. And to stand up what's right, whether it's bullying on the playground or broader social issues. My students have organized a variety of clubs that usually meet over my meager half-hour lunch. The voluntary clubs tend to correspond to social movements of the day: Kids Against Child Labor, Students to Save a Neighborhood Swimming Pool, Immigrant Rights, Rescue Our Librarians Club, Kids Against the War, the Iraq War. That's one of the side benefits of living in an imperialist country like our own. There's always a war going on that you can involve students in critiquing. And in fact, anyone in 7th grade and younger have lived their entire life under the shadow of the U.S.-Afghanistan war. Today is the 10th anniversary, of course, of the invasion of Iraq. Just as whiteness has been normalized in this country, a state of war has become the new normal in America. Now, in the spring of 2011, during the Wisconsin worker uprising, did anybody get up to Madison at that time? Okay, a few people. Fraternity students and parents joined the protests. Some traveled in carpools, some came on our teacher union buses. In my class, we wrote about their concerns. I'll share one example. It grew out of a simple after-lunch, sit down and be quiet and write in your journal time. And prompt was only 7 words long. What budget cuts mean to me? And I walked around my classroom encouraging students, and I came to Edie Redwine, a student of Irish and Ojibwe origin. She was finished, and so I could look at her journal entry. I read it quickly and said, "Great poem." She looked up at me with a penetrating glare that reminded me of how my 2 daughters looked at me when they were younger when they thought I had said something really stupid. She said, "It's not a poem, it's a letter to the governor." I will read it. A letter to Governor Scott Walker. That wasn't on the top of it. I spelled the first place and put the title. I'm not, that's a letter to Governor Scott Walker by Edie Redwine. Budget cuts, an unfair mutiny that destroys the economy and slowly tears apart all humanity. It makes the flaws of ourselves that much deeper, that much bigger, that much more hurtful. It's hard to believe that all this circles around Governor Walker, king of destroying schools and jobs. So congratulations, Scott. You ruined kids' lives. Now, isn't that a sport? Sincerely, just a student. P.S. Kids are the future. Frightened? Just for the record, Edie read this poem at the 5th grade graduation celebration with over 200 parents and got thunderous applause. She also sent it to Governor Walker and got no reply. Now I should note that while Fratney has many progressive parents, and teachers, the city of Milwaukee is surrounded by a noose of white conservatism that is incited by right-wing radio talk shows. For example, the day after it was announced I was Wisconsin Elementary Teacher of the Year, about 17 years ago, Charlie Sykes, a widely listened to talk show host, spent the next 2 days, claiming I was committing child abuse in my classroom. His evidence? An article in Rethinking Schools where I'd written about getting 5th graders to look at gender and race bias in entries in a new CD-ROM encyclopedia. I take great care. I have to say that all the teachers wrote a letter to him saying that inviting him to come to our school to watch me teach, and he refused. But I have to say I take great care to be nonpartisan. I don't tell children what to think, but I also refuse to demonstrate or model moral apathy. If I'm neutral and show no opinion about a racist attack or global climate change, what am I communicating to my students? I don't tell them what to think, but I do demand that they have to think. They have to think and think through role plays, dramatizations, debates. I get them to look, as I said, at multiple perspectives. Put another way, as teachers, we should foster civic courage. We should act as if we live in a democracy. I often hear from teachers that scripted curriculum and addiction with testing and data is so overwhelming that they can't teach in social justice ways. And there's some truth to that, but there's not some truth to that, because we shouldn't be following directions. I agree it's hard, but here's a couple different approaches. One, we have to figure out how to change the big picture. That's where a union fits in, that's where alliances with community fits in, groups of parents. And for example, it doesn't always happen, we're not going to change everything overnight. But in Milwaukee, we saw the negative impact of testing on kindergarten classes. Really, really obnoxious computerized tests for kids. And so we thought, we can't attack all of testing. Let's look at that section. So we organized a school board member, who happens to be an editor of Rethinking Schools, to introduce a resolution to establish a joint union administration task force to make recommendations for developmentally appropriate practices in early childhood years. We mobilized dozens of teachers and parents to speak at the school board. We got it passed. It's in the process this coming month. If we can fight a few recalcitrant administrators, it will be presented, well, actually, even if we can't fight them, we'll just present it anyway at the school board. And we're pushing some sane policies at that level. Second, so the big picture, that's one thing. Secondly, we can encourage people to work with others to transform their whole school, or to create pockets within schools, or programs within schools that allow for that kind of social justice teaching. Let me be clear, I'm not suggesting setting up charter schools. Visitors to Fratney often ask, are you a charter school? It's so creative. I said, no, we're not. I believe all public schools should be innovative. The third thing for teachers to do is to weave social justice into your curriculum, into the bulletin boards. In February, maybe not a Valentine's bulletin board, maybe African American History Month bulletin board, or a Women's History Month bulletin board. I mean, grade schools are too often curricula by holidays. You know, kids get enough holidays in terms of whatever. So let's take math. I'm going to give you let's say we're teaching problem-solving skills, 5th grade level. Here might be the traditional problem. A group of youth, aged 14, 15, and 16, go to the store. Candy bars are on sale for 43 cents each. They buy a total of 12 candy bars. How much do they spend? Not including tax. Okay? Here's a different problem that I might replace that problem with. Factory workers aged 14, 15, and 16 in Honduras make children's clothing for Walmart. Each worker earns 43 cents an hour, and they work a 14-hour shift each day. How much does each worker make in one day, excluding fees deducted by the employers? Both problems are veiled examples of applying multi-digit multiplication, and each has more to say as well. The first example is sort of subtext is consumerism. You know, go to the store, practical math, right? The second is explicit text about global issues, child labor. It highlights certain social relations. I can teach the skill by teaching something else simultaneously. Now, I'm going to close my presentation with 2 poems from one of my students, Osvaldo. The first poem was a result of a comment he made during a math lesson, similar to one I just described, about sweatshops. It's from the Rethinking Globalization. And I put on the overhead some pictures of child labor. I really like overheads because they have a gazillion number of overheads already. And I can't figure out how to put them in the computer. Anyway, had pictures of kids carrying bricks in India, child weavers in Pakistan, farm workers in Central America and the United States. And we're discussing why families have to have their kids work. And Osvaldo, who usually didn't say much of anything in a classroom conversation, raised his hand and said, "I know about that. I used to do that when I was 5 years old." "You did what?" I said. "I worked in the fields with mi abuela, my grandmother." I thanked him for his comment, and we talked some more, and I asked him if he liked working in the fields, secretly hoping he'd confirm the problems with child labor that we'd been learning about. "Yeah, it was sort of fun for a while," he said. "Did you want to go to school instead?" "No," he said, full well knowing I was hoping for a different answer. "The teachers are mean there. If you misbehaved in the school, the teacher put biting ants down your back." I don't know. My only response was, "Oh, I guess that's reason enough not to go to school, or at least not to misbehave in school." Later that day, I asked him if he'd write a poem about his experience. This is what he wrote. "A 5-year-old boy by Osvaldo Espinosa, based on the true life of Osvaldo. I'm a 5-year-old boy working to support my family. I'm a boy walking for a mile just to get clean water out of the pozo, the well. I'm a boy carrying a sack full of caña for more than a mile. I'm a boy watching for snakes and scorpions while working. I'm a boy carrying food for my farm animals. I'm a boy working for hours in the sun. I'm a boy working in pain in my back and arms and legs. I'm a boy sleeping with pain and bruises on my fingers." He showed it to me. I was like, we read it to the class, and they were like, "Wow, Osvaldo, you exist. You are amazing." And I talked to him and said, "You want to write a poem about coming to the United States?" "No." I said, "Fine. How about getting here? I mean, after you come." He said, so the next day he comes in with another poem. I'm a 5-year-old boy living in the United States. I'm a boy eating strange food. I'm a boy going to school. I'm a boy seeing my first time a TV show. I'm a boy having my first game station. I'm a boy seeing other people like African American, Puerto Ricans, and Americans. I'm a boy living happily in my new home. I'm a boy feeling sad for being far away from my grandma and grandpa. I'm a boy getting chubbier each year for not working." It's wonderful teaching. It's just incredible. A few weeks later, I was explaining to my students that I was going to give a keynote speech at a math conference out east with the title Numbers Count. And so I repeated what I said all years. Numbers are really important if we want to understand and change the world. And I said, if anybody wants to write a poem that would show that numbers count, give it to me and I might use it in my speech. Osvaldo came through again. Numbers count. And, take it for what it's worth. This is a couple of years ago in the middle of the Iraq War. Numbers do count, Mr. President. 2,453 American soldiers are dying. 17,648 soldiers are wounded. 35,161 innocent Iraqi people are dying. 281,864,948 $281,864,948,707 are wasted in war. Imagine how much we can do around the world with that money. We can feed the needy, build houses, give scholarships, and much more. Do you care about the people? I do. So swallow his voice. We care about the people. We wouldn't go into teaching if we didn't care. But we also recognize that in this class stratified and racially divided society, we have to do more than care. We have to teach and organize for social justice. We need to create classrooms that are laboratories for social justice. We need to create schools that are centers of renaissance and resistance in our beleaguered neighborhoods. We need to build and transform our teacher unions into social justice unions. And we need to be organized in a plethora of many different organizations, building a social justice education movement that's linked to other movements for social justice. But it's not easy. Our nation leaders are promoting privatization and choice as solutions to social problems, and our mass media promotes consumption as solutions to individual problems. But history tells us that hope can defeat despair. I tell my 10-year-old students at the beginning of each school year that we are going to learn about the great social movements throughout history and study some of the great conflicts of time. I tell my students we're going to look at the current social movements for social justice, like the movements for immigrant rights, or movements to end sweatshop labor, or the movements to stop global warming. And I tell my students that there will be social justice movements in the future, and it will be their choice. It will be up to them, as it is up to each of us, to decide if we're going to participate in the great social justice movements of our time, and intervene on the side of justice and life on this planet. This will be our students' choice. It is now our choice. Let us continue to choose the struggle for justice. Let us choose hope over despair. Thank you very much.
I think Bob and Karen are pointing to me, unfortunately. But there was a question around Teach for America, and I have done some research on Teach for America, and it's come up at every single event that I've spoken to in other cities, so I thought, sure, I'll talk for Teach for America. And one of the things that I try, and it's very similar when I say I don't criticize parents for where they send in their children to school. I don't criticize Teach for America teachers, because some of them, they're great people. I mean, they're smart, they're energetic, they want to make the world better. At least many of them. But I do criticize Wendy. I mean, she just drives me nuts. And the reason she drives me nuts is she's saying, I'm going to save American education. But you know what Wendy created? She created a glorified temp agency. And it's a glorified temp agency for, by and large, privileged kids who haven't quite yet figured out what they want to do with their lives. It's sort of the Wendy equivalent of what they have in England called the gap year. Only they get paid for that gap year. And they come in and they pretend that they're going to save American education. So that's one thing. Because Teach for America's game plan, their policy, their entire structure is based on 2 years in, 2 years out. It's also based on a conscious undermining of community. Because they do not hire people from the community for Teach for America in those schools. They helicopter them in. So you'll have people from the Ivy League schools in Madison, and they'll helicopter them in to New Orleans, to inner city schools in Milwaukee, not the schools that they attended. And they come with this missionary attitude like, I'm going to save these people here in these poor schools. So there's a huge missionary aspect as well. And this comes from Wendy. And one of the things that also bothers me is how the quote-unquote education reform movement, which I don't even want to go there, I'll talk about that at some other point perhaps, but how they have privileged Teach for America over teacher education programs who want people from the community, who are teaching people to be teachers as a career and as an art and as a skill. Interestingly, in Wisconsin, and this to me exposes a lot of what Teach for America as a policy and as an organization is about. As I mentioned, Governor Scott Walker is increasing his attacks on public education, wants to expand vouchers, wants to expand privately run charters. There's no money to help teachers in the budget. The Milwaukee public schools are not getting any money from Scott Walker. Teach for America has $1 million in the Wisconsin budget specifically earmarked just for Teach for America. I think that's a disgrace. So anyhow, again, Teach for America students, people who go into Teach for America, I hope you stay in education. I hope you realize what's going on with Wendy's game plan. But when it comes to Teach for America, the organization, again, it's a glorified temp agency for affluent kids who haven't quite figured out what they want to do.
All right, so I don't even call it Teach for America. I call it Teach for what?
Teach for a resume.
Resume, teach on other people's children. Again, the problem is not the students who want to give to our community. The problem is that the organization itself has turned itself into a policy-making organization. So it promotes people like Michelle Reed, who actually lie about their own results. If you know anything about her, she claims these miraculous test score changes, and I fired all the bad teachers, I got rid of principals. Again, public information, because I did it in public. But then when you go and you unpack this, you see there's a huge scandal right now about erasing test score questions to go from the wrong answer to the right answer. We're seeing this now in some of the schools, some of the AUSL schools. We're seeing a variety of huge gaming the system. And that's what happens when you put metrics out there. So you're going to see a lot of gaming the system. But the other part is that Teach for America's original purpose was to provide a teaching force to underserved areas, to areas that had a teacher shortage. We do not have a teacher shortage. They're laying off teachers, and often older, veteran teachers of color. So for me, this is also another racist, classist attack. And the key is we are in a position right now where the 1% is so bold and has no sense of history and is actually destroying the middle class for a consumerist society. And again, the whole notion of choice. Well, everybody deserves a choice. What happens if you make the wrong choice? What happens if you send your kid to a school that doesn't perform well? Here's the key. There are schools all over this country that are boycotting the standardized testing movement. The lab schools, Francis Parker, you know about those schools here in Chicago? They don't test their children to death. They don't have this rigorous curriculum, and rigorous not in the sense of rich, rigor in the sense of like death, like rigor mortis. Rigor means that too. Those schools aren't taking voucher kids, because if you had vouchers, it would never be enough to cover that tuition. But those schools have unionized teachers. So if you look at the arguments around TFA, and they're going to do the salvation narrative, I would tell you there are other ways to do this work and to make this commitment. So again, the organization is a resume padding organization. They promise that they will find you in the right, they will send you to the right graduate schools or into Wall Street for the rest of your career. Or we have people that do 2 years of TFA and now they're experts, so they also become administrators without any kind of experience. right now in CPS, I cannot tell you how many TFA and Broad people that are there. One of the women that's in charge of assessment is a TFA. I haven't yet teased out why she's in charge of assessment, but you know, what her credentials are. But there was a time where you had to be a psychometrician to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
Not now, you know, do TFA and you know, be willing to work 20-hour days, and you know, you too shall be rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Go ahead and back.
Speak up. I will.
Oh, full disclosure, this is my high school English teacher standing right here.
What chance is there that the Chicago Board of Education can get elected? Because there's a need for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I you know, it will take serious organizing amongst the people in the city. There is a cry for it. People want a democratically elected school board. Now that doesn't mean you still won't get these rich people buying seats. But the key is that state law prevents it. I'm not seeing Mayor Rahm Emanuel cede an inch to the people. I mean, matter of fact, people actually tried to get it on the ballot in the November election, and for some reason or other, they didn't have the right things, and you know, I mean, there were political movements. I don't know, but I know one thing: if we don't try, we certainly won't have it. The key is, you may not win every fight, but if you aren't swinging, you for sure aren't going to win. So again, this goes back to not following directions. This goes to standing up, but not by yourselves, collectively, with your parents, with your community. Because I can guarantee you, when you make outreach to your parents, and I will tell you this, when you get in the classroom, the first phone call home cannot be, your kid is driving me crazy. Okay, remember that. It can't be that. You have to talk about how much you're looking forward to spending time with these children this year. And keep in communication with your parents. Because as Bob said, you can't call on parents to come help you if you haven't established a relationship with them. So the key is, these are our natural allies. And when we step forward, and every single community across the city says, we demand democracy. We demand a representative elected school board. That's when it will happen. Because if the politicians stop, the transparency piece, that's one thing good about the 24/7 news cycle, will come to, why are you denying people their democratic rights? Because when you're rich and you're privileged, you know better.
First of all, I feel very fortunate to have been here. This is as complicated and deep a conversation I've ever heard. And I wish it was taped. And I also wish you three, I know you're busy people, but maybe you could take this on the road. And go before conversation. This is really spectacular.
The Billairs, the terrorists.
Out around the terrorists.
Speaks volumes about the community and the networking that's necessary for this kind of work. Bill is a retired professor from the College of Education, for those of you who do not know, who contacted me, luckily for all of us, on January 4th, and said, Barbara Miner of Thinking School Spain has a new book out. Please contact her, and thus this. So Bill never goes out. He always thinks of us. He is passionate about the work in a variety of ways, but he's never retired. So thank you, Bill.
parents, and the question sometimes comes up, but what do you have against the tests? I mean, what else is there? And I think it would be helpful to me, and I think helpful to us, if you could weigh in a little bit on how we ordinary folks should address that with ordinary folks who ask us that question, because it's in the air. And so that's one. Secondly, and linked to that, and this I guess is going to Barbara, all of us, I think, share, and many of you, if you don't already share, will certainly share, a deep, deep critique of standardized testing. And you're right, it's fraudulent, and the claims that it makes are fraudulent. The problem is, occasionally, when the standardized tests work for the argument, we drift into saying what the standardized tests say. How do we not drift into that? So, for example, the charter schools or the contract schools, okay, their test scores are just as flat as everybody else's, but do we really want to make that argument? Or when we make it, what's our caveat?
I think that's a very important question, and I'm going to speak as a parent, because, poor Bob, sometimes, he'll be at work and he'll have the mayor yell at him, the superintendent yells at him, and he comes home and I yell at him, and part of what I yell at him about is, you guys gotta stop doing all this what you're against and start talking about what you're for. And so when the discussion is, well, I'm against this test, and I'm against this NCLB, and I'm against the da-da-da-da-da, that doesn't really speak to parents, I don't think, because it didn't always speak that well to me. Because parents do want to know how their kids are doing. And not all parents, and someone will say, well, come visit my classroom. Well, not all parents have the time to take off work and come visit the classroom. That's what a teacher the other day told me. Well, I tell parents to come to my classroom. And I said, well, great, if you told me that, I would have really spit in your face. But anyhow, so I think, well, you said a swear word earlier. You should see us at home. Oh, boy. Anyhow. One of my concerns is too much of the good guys, and we have to go beyond the good guys and bad guys, that's another discussion, but I think it's a very important discussion. But the good guys have to go beyond defense. I mean, we're all defense and no offense. And they say, you're like a basketball team that, they got a 7-foot guy in front of the net just bonking down the balls, but doesn't have anyone who can go shoot down at the other end. And so one of the things that I've encouraged Bob, I tell Bob a lot what to do, and unfortunately so does everyone else, but one of the things we did in Milwaukee this summer was, there were some great women from the community who happened to live in a neighborhood where a charter school was coming into an old factory. And they saw all these huge electrical transformer lines, and no playground, and it was just an old factory, and they said, what's going on? That this old, dirty, dingy factory that they don't even want people to work in is suddenly going to be a school? So these women, and it was going to be a city charter school because that's where all these some of the sketchy charter schools at this point get approved. So they did an ordinance through the zoning commission. I mean, who would have thunk that the city zoning commission was where you would start talking about school reform? And they had a law, pretty simple, and it applied mostly to the charters and voucher schools because the public schools in Milwaukee are not growing. But it said that every new school in the city of Milwaukee, to be approved by the zoning commission, which schools have to be approved by, had to have a playground. And the school voucher movement immediately sent out a press release saying, oh, no, we can't have that, because that'll take the emphasis off of academic standards. And we put them on the spot. We took the offense and said, wait a minute, are you seriously telling us that children do not deserve playgrounds? So we need to talk about what we're for, regardless of what school it is, because in Milwaukee now, we have so many options. We have marketplace chaos, and we're choking on all our options. But we do want to change the conversation and show that it is public school teachers and public school parents and public school union members who are saying, no, let's talk about what we want for our children. We want art and music. We want playgrounds. We want comprehensive curriculums. We want libraries. And so, again, we really have to take the offense and not just completely be fixated on what we're against. And I think too much really, it's like, no, against the standardized test. If you start demanding what you're for, I think part of that standardized test, it will be put in a context. And parents understand. They don't want their kids to be testing machines. But we, again, just have to take the offense.
Well, I think Bill said something that's really interesting, because the key is, how do you use somebody else's argument against them, right? So I am for authentic assessment. And authentic assessment relies on the professional judgment of the teacher. So at the beginning, I mean, this is why I love portfolios. I've always believed in them. They are more work for teachers. However, they give you way more insight into student growth than any other measurement, because the standardized test is simply a snapshot of that particular day and time. And in Chicago, you know, God forbid somebody's uncle, cousin, sister, mother, father was shot the night before, or whatever. You know how our schools are. Our children have issues outside of them. So the one thing that I would suggest, and the one thing that we're working on with schools across the country and teachers across the country, we're looking at putting together some authentic alternative to standardized tests. But here's the most interesting argument against them for me in terms of what we're for. The elite universities in this country are moving away from standardized tests. They're not using them, because grade point averages are a much better predictor of what children can actually do in college. But that doesn't put money in the hands of the Pearsons and McGraw-Hills and whoever else is, you know, putting out standardized tests. So the key is the metrics that we talk about. So when you say charter schools or contract schools, that's what they give us to comment on. All right? So we can't pretend like it doesn't exist. That would be lovely, but, you know, that would be crazy land, and I'm not on the crazy train. That's the one thing I refuse to get on. Other people are on that, not me. So for us to talk about what we are for, we're talking about professional judgment. We can talk about Finland. They don't test their children. They do portfolios in Finland. That's their benchmark. Oh, Finland this, Finland that. And it's not because it's a homogeneous society, but it is because in Finland they would not tolerate child poverty hanging around 25%. The problem we have right now is that the voucher movement, the charter movement, the this, that, and the other movement on that side of the table allows people to not address the issues of poverty in America. And not just poverty, but the inequity and income inequality that's getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm not going to ever stop saying it. And then they come back and say, well, doesn't that mean that a child that's in a zip code should have an opportunity to go someplace else? Yes, if you have someplace else really ready for them to do whatever it is you claim you want them to do. But I say, force them to tell you they are not going to resource the schools in which you work. And that's what happened here in Chicago. This guy straight up said, he's the chief administrative officer, said, we will not put resources into a building we know we're going to close. He said it out loud. People forget about it because he only said it for a minute and it was in paper for one day, and we have such a, but that means a lot. And again, it goes back to, as Barbara said, who are the policymakers and what kind of decisions do they make? So the key is utilize the gold standard, which is their elite universities that are not, I know Mount Holyoke doesn't require test scores anymore. It's test score optional. So if it's test score optional for the very best schools, then why are we continuing? And the key is because let me just say this. Lonnie Guinier, who was up to be the Attorney General and was viciously attacked and swift-boated by the right, and they called her the quota queen. But Lonnie Grenier was a brilliant thinker, and she said 3 questions that we should always ask ourselves. And I sort of wove a little bit into my talk to you, and that is, who are the winners and losers, which you can tell by the ranking and sorting. The key is always, who made the rules to the game? You know? I mean, because if you make the rules, you have an advantage. That's why people say, well, why don't you sue the board? And why don't you go to Springfield? Okay, we can do that, but that is somebody else's game, where the rules are already done, right? So we're not going to not play that game, but we have to be very mindful about what that means. But the third question Lonnie Grenier says that we don't ask ourselves over and over and over again is that, what are the stories the winner tells the losers to keep them playing the game? And that's the whole test score conundrum right now. Because this test score will tell you something that it does not tell you. So the key to standardized tests are not necessarily the test, but what the tests are used for. If they're used to punish and publicly humiliate people, then that's what I have the issue with. I have the issue more with that than anything else. I just say, take the test, understand what it means, put the number out there, because there used to be a time when people would say, have a nice night, you know, get up, take the test. There was no high stakes attached to it. The problem is, this is a blunt instrument and tool that is improperly used. So it's not just the test, it's what it's used for. Say that to people. And that's how you can say, oh, I'm not against the tests. I'm against how you use them inappropriately.
Let me add a few thoughts. We hear all the time that everything has to be data-driven. And we have an alternative. We say it should be child-driven, data-informed. In Milwaukee, there's this big push, for example, to be data-driven around suspensions. We have to reduce the number of suspensions. So what are principals? And the principals are held to that. So what are they doing? They're just reducing the number of suspensions. They're not dealing with the discipline issues. And so things are more chaotic. But you know what? The data really looks good. You know, it hit the target, but it missed the point. And so I think that's really important for us to keep in mind. The other thing is, I agree with portfolios. There's exhibitions that are done that really hold and then also what we call performance assessments. In Milwaukee, for a short period of time, all 4th and 5th grade teachers had to have the kids actually videotaped and do an oral presentation. And it was like amazing. All of a sudden, teachers were being forced to learn how to use videotapes. And the recalcitrant teachers actually had the kids up in front of the class talking, you know, as opposed to just, you know, lecture. It was great, because bottom line is assessment does drive instruction. And that's a powerful thing with talking to parents. Okay, what kind of instruction do we want? Well, if we want kids to experiment in science and really think, well then one of their assessments should be a performance assessment about getting some, you know, having a kit. This is what we did for a couple of years in Milwaukee. A kit of different things with a problem, and the kids have to write a hypothesis, and then they have to do the experiment, they have to write about the experiment, and then the teachers have to get together and grade it on a rubric, and teachers are having all this conversation about what's good science instruction, and it's like really amazing. It does cost more money though. It takes more time. And so that was swept under the rug, and now kids can take multiple choice tests on science, and they just, you know, but what does it mean? It reduces science to factoid kind of retrieval, not real critical thinking. I think we have to work hard and get those examples, and then figure out how to create specific demands in different locales to say, no, fine, we'll take the once-a-year state test. I mean, I have no problems with that. But when it means that then you had to take another test every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks to make sure that the kids are going to be on task, and then if you don't have them on task, then you have to drill down, I hate that word, drill down deeper into the data and see what skills they need to do, and so you give them more electronic worksheets at a computer. It becomes a cycle that really is frightening. Yeah. How about, I know we're going to like 6:30, is it we're going to? So maybe another question, then we can just wrap up. Somebody?
Some of the questions that didn't get to me on time, if you wanted to raise noise, we yell. Then you want to stop. Want to raise your question?
Sure. Whether you want to or not. You're going to raise it.
Karen Lewis, and it was about having like conversations with like all the people in CPS, like the leaders. You know, we know they're not very like qualified. They're not qualified. Like they're not like they have no teacher experience. So like I saw like in Facebook like this Becky Carroll. She said that if you have like a high quality teacher, like you can have 40 students. How can you have conversations with those people where they don't really have that knowledge, and then they say all these really like
Okay, so you want to hear a funny story? My husband taught Becky Carroll. Not only were my parents teachers, my husband is a retired teacher. I also know somebody that taught Becky Carroll math, and I teased him at the last meeting, and I said, what, did you not teach this woman how to do math? Look, that is a common discussion. I mean, what you have to understand is the reform movement has its talking points, and Becky Carroll is a communications person. So the talking points, you hear it. I heard it on Michelle Reed Telling a Lie Friday night, where she told this story about going to a school, first period, and there were only 7 kids in this classroom and 7 kids in this classroom, 7 kids. Then she goes to this classroom where there are 35 children, and they're engaged, and there's this great teacher. And then after first period, some kids leave. They actually leave the building, and she follows them and asks them, well, where are you going? And they said to her, oh, well, we love our first period class. It's a great teacher. He answers our questions and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, we don't really care about the rest of the day, so we go home. Well, first of all, anybody listening to that that's ever been in a classroom knows she was lying, right? So part of the mythology is that an effective teacher can teach 1,000 children. It doesn't matter, you know, because relationships don't matter to these people because they don't have any. You know, they are defined by their money. I mean, Bill Gates, he thinks everybody should be sitting in front of a computer. So you have to remember who these people are and what their motives are. So when they say things like this, but this is a very common, again, they all have the same playbook. So I try to remind people that what you hear in Chicago, you're hearing in New York, you're hearing in Cleveland, you're hearing in Detroit, you're hearing in LA, because they all have the same playbook. Where we have gone wrong, I think, as teachers, is we've actually tried to explain things to people, you know, and not just say the same crazy stuff over and over again. Because what happens is if you say the same crazy stuff over and over again, people start to believe it. And like, teachers don't care about kids. They only care about themselves. The adults, it's all about the adults. We're all about the kids. They call themselves students first. But how do you call yourself students first when you won't listen to what students and parents have to say? So the key is, you and I know very well, it is ineffective to have a teacher in a classroom with 40 children. Class sizes matter. When you have time to deal individually with children, not only can you assess their learning appropriately and tweak what they need on an individual basis, it also gives you an opportunity to reflect on your own practice with other people, because you have enough time to focus in on individual children. So that is one of my concerns about the school closing piece, is that we're going to see class sizes skyrocket. And we're going to have more and more Becky Carrolls who don't know anything. But I mean, I mentioned it to Barbara Bird Bennett, and I will tell you, she was embarrassed that Becky Carroll would say that. But Becky Carroll, even though she is the CPS spokesmodel, to let it sink in, right? Everybody's tired. She actually was put there by Rahm Emanuel, so she doesn't really report to them. She reports to the mayor, and he has his talking points. Remember, a longer school day. I want the school day long. 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 Well, you know, okay. But the key is why we want the school day better.
Yes.
It's a better school day, not a longer school day. And let me tell you what, that resonated with parents. Parents do not want their children all day doing nothing but reading, math. Because that's what's on the task. They don't want that for their children. People want their children to have the joy of learning. And as Margaret just said, oh no, we can't have a playground. You know, we were behind parents that wanted recess. We actually believe recess is sort of important. So you cannot allow people to constantly just say crazy things. And you can't. You absolutely, every time somebody says something crazy, you have to be Johnny on the spot and say, oh, no. Right? And the key is push yourselves forward and push yourselves. But the issues are, tell your friends who are not teachers. Tell your parents. Tell the people you know. Because as they start telling everybody they know, you have a basis for real communication. Because if you just read the newspapers and, it's like, the teacher should just shut up and take whatever the mayor says because he knows better. I don't think so. So the key is, you are the experts for education. You are the experts. Every one of you should know your elected officials. They should know who you are, so when they think about doing something crazy, they should pick up the phone and say, I should call Miguel, because maybe he knows something about this. But if they don't know who you are, they continue to do anything that some lobbyist tells them they should do. So some group like Stand On Children can come through and give out a lot of money, and whatever they're saying, they'll buy. So the key is, we have got to take our institutions back, and we do it conversation by conversation, building by building, block by block. That's how it works. Because if we don't, the 1% will continue to rule. Because as Lucy Parsons said, never think for a minute that the rich will allow you to legislate their wealth away from them.